They taped a $250 violation notice to my grill, on Veterans Day, no less. Name's Walter Beckett, 75, retired vet, still using the same coal pit since '82, the kind that smells like pride and hickory smoke. The wind chimes barely moved that morning, but something sure did. Wanna tell me if that sounds fair? The smell of hickory smoke floated through the crisp October air as Walter Beckett flipped ribs on his rusted backyard grill, same one he'd used since '82. Leaves rustled softly along the edge of the fence, and wind chimes clinked a lazy tune on the porch. Walter moved with slow precision, nudging glowing coals with the long-handled poker he'd fashioned himself. The fire crackled as he coaxed out an even heat. Above him, an oak tree stretched its limbs like an old friend, casting a familiar shade over the modest backyard of his home in Springdale Grove. From the open kitchen window, the low hum of a college documentary assignment filtered out. Ellie balanced a small camera on the window ledge, its lens pointed squarely at Walter. "Grandpa, can you tell me again what Charlie used to say about your ribs?" Walter's lips twitched upward, but he didn't look back. "Said mine could make a man forget his debts and his sins. And Charlie had plenty of both." The camera caught the faint smile that accompanied the memory. Ellie chuckled and moved to join him outside, stepping over the creaky porch plank. She wore one of his old jackets, sleeves rolled up, collar popped, and held a coffee mug with a faded #OneGrandpa print. "Smells like a story," she teased. Walter offered the spatula. "Smells like patience. Something your generation rushes past." Ellie took the cue, though she didn't flip anything. She just watched him work, filming short clips, occasionally asking questions for her film project. It was the third day of her fall break visit, and every morning she'd followed him like a quiet shadow. By the wooden fence, an old post jutted from the ground, weathered and split near the base. The carved name, Beckett Way, was barely legible, dulled by decades but still defiant. Walter gave it a passing glance. "They let you name that?" Ellie asked, turning her lens toward it. "They didn't stop me. That was back before committees and signatures. Just a few beers, a hammer, and a stubborn friend." Ellie tilted the camera down, silent for a beat. A cheerful whistle came from the sidewalk out front. Mailman Gary appeared, rocking slightly on his heels, a man in no hurry. He waved a padded envelope. "Morning, Walter. Special delivery." He glanced toward the grill and added with a grin, "Same scent every Sunday. Makes my route feel like progress." Walter stepped to the gate and took the envelope with a small grunt. "Hope it's ribs next time." Gary leaned closer. "Came certified. From the HOA office, I think. You know how Karen Templeton gets when she's bored." With a wink and a finger to his cap, Gary ambled off. Ellie moved closer as Walter slit the envelope. The rustle of paper broke the calm. He unfolded the notice and read slowly, jaw tightening as the words sank in. "Due to ongoing violations regarding open flame smoke emissions," he murmured, "a $250 fine has been issued." His voice trailed off. "Grandpa?" Ellie said softly. Walter held up the paper, tapping the final line with one calloused finger. "Mandatory cessation of all outdoor smoke-producing activities." He blew out a long breath and stared toward the grill. Ellie frowned. "They're fining you for barbecue?" Walter nodded once. "Never had a problem when your grandma was around. She used to make cobbler for the board meetings." He folded the paper carefully, not crumpling it, and slipped it into his back pocket like a bill he'd decide later how to pay. He turned off the camera Ellie had forgotten was still recording and looked at her. "Don't go worrying, now. It's their job to send letters. Mine to decide if I care." But Ellie wasn't ready to drop it. She glanced down at her phone, fingers pausing above the screen. She raised her phone. "Let's make sure your side of the story gets told too, Grandpa." Karen Templeton's SUV glided into Walter's driveway like it owned the place, tires quiet, intentions loud. The sunlight had turned a deeper shade of gold, brushing warm hues over the porch's faded railings. Wind chimes danced again in the breeze, this time with less cheer and more tension. Walter, seated in his creaky lawn chair, caught the glint of chrome as Karen's vehicle stopped with clinical precision just inches from his hibiscus planter. Ellie lowered her camera slowly, eyeing the polished doors with a filmmaker's wariness. Out stepped Karen, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy blazer and khaki slacks, hair pulled taut in a bun that gleamed with fresh color. She held a leather clipboard to her chest like a badge of honor. Her heels clicked smartly on the pathway stones as she approached, not bothering to glance at the modest decorations Ellie had helped put up earlier, a string of paper leaves, a hanging acorn wind spinner, and the "Welcome Fall, Y'all" sign by the door. "Mr. Beckett," she said, voice pleasant but entirely void of warmth. "I was hoping we could speak." Walter stood up slowly, hand resting on the porch beam. "Didn't know appointments weren't needed these days." Karen smiled tightly. "Some matters can't wait for committee meetings." From her perch near the steps, Ellie lifted her phone discreetly. Her lens caught the edge of Karen's clipboard, bristling with colored tabs. She leaned closer and whispered, "She's got more tabs than my thesis binder." Karen cleared her throat. "I'm here regarding Regulation 4.2 of the Springdale Grove Community Ordinance," she began, flipping precisely to the right page. "It clearly states that smoke-producing activity outdoors must be limited to non-hazardous use and cannot impact neighboring homes." Walter frowned. "I've been grilling ribs on Sundays for nearly 40 years. Same spot. Same coals." Karen adjusted her glasses and nodded curtly. "Yes. And under the updated guidelines, filed March of last year, such activities now require pre-approval if smoke crosses property lines. Which, according to 2 anonymous complaints, it has." Ellie stepped down one stair. "Anonymous complaints? How convenient." Karen turned slightly toward her but kept her tone restrained. "Your presence here, Miss Beckett, doesn't exempt this property from community standards. I'm sure your grandfather understands that." Walter's fingers tapped slowly against the armrest. "You telling me I need permission to flip ribs in my own backyard now?" Karen tilted her head. "We all agreed to the bylaws when we moved in. They evolved to reflect safety and cohesion." She pulled a folded copy of the cited regulation from her clipboard and extended it. "Additionally, continued non-compliance could result in further fines. Or a lien, if necessary." A passing group of neighborhood kids pedaled by on their bikes, laughter fading into silence as they saw Karen standing at Walter's porch. Mrs. Park peeked through her curtains across the street, hose dribbling onto already wet marigolds, pretending not to watch. Walter took the paper without a word. His lips thinned as he scanned the text, jaw flexing. Karen offered a final nod. "We do hope for cooperation, Mr. Beckett. This doesn't have to be adversarial." She turned, heels clicking back down the steps, and slipped into the SUV without another word. The vehicle rolled away with the same quiet arrogance it had arrived. Ellie stood still, arms crossed. "Didn't sound very neighborly." Walter rubbed his temples slowly, then stepped back inside the house. Ellie followed, slipping the phone into her pocket. At the kitchen table, Walter unfolded the printout again, squinting at the language. Ellie pulled out her laptop, fingers moving quickly. "Regulation 4.2, she mumbled. "Let's see, here. Original version. Applies to commercial food vendors and public events. Not private residential use." Walter looked up sharply. "You sure?" Ellie turned the screen. "Says it right there." "But," she scrolled down, eyes narrowing, "this version's dated 2 years ago. There's a second upload. A PDF from last year. No signatures. Says, amendment passed by board vote, closed session." Walter straightened in his chair. "Closed session? Didn't even know we had one." He picked up the house phone, knuckles widening as he dialed the HOA's hotline number. After a moment, a cheerful but robotic voice answered. "Yes, sir," said the operator after a brief pause. The Regulation 4.2 amendment was filed during a closed executive session led by President Templeton in March last year. "No notice?" Walter asked. I believe it was posted in the newsletter. In the miscellaneous updates section. Walter exhaled through his nose and hung up. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to rattle the wind chimes into an irritated little chorus. Ellie looked up from her screen, eyes sharp. Let's see how public this session really was. Walter stood in the county archives, thumbing through dusty HOA documents, his breath fogging slightly in the chilly November air. The building smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of steel filing cabinets that hadn't been updated in decades. Walter moved deliberately, his thick fingers careful not to tear the aging manila folders. The jacket he wore, faded denim lined with shearling, was pinned with a patch from his old infantry unit. It had seen better days, but then again, so had this whole process. Ellie paced beside him, phone in hand, camera app open and scanning. Every so often, she'd mutter a date or regulation number before snapping a shot. As she skimmed one particularly yellowed sheet, she softly hummed, "This land is your land," half a habit, half a protest song. Walter stopped when he found it, HOA Regulations, Springdale Grove, Revision Log, 1994. The entry for Outdoor Activity Restrictions was bare. No mention of Regulation 4.2. No notes on barbecuing. His eyes scanned down the pages, then cross-referenced with a 2024 digital printout from Karen's clipboard Ellie had photographed. The amendment, with its careful language about airborne particulates and public comfort zones, was nowhere to be found in the physical record. Not even as a proposed change. He rubbed his chin. This wasn't passed by the neighborhood. Ellie angled the camera to record his expression. Looks like Karen made a solo performance. They left the archives just as the first breeze of the day picked up, kicking golden leaves across the parking lot. Ellie edited a short reel on the ride back, old images of neighborhood BBQs set to soft jazz, Walter's voice saying, "A barbecue is not a criminal act." Later, they strolled through Springdale Grove's leaf-strewn sidewalks. The flags from Veterans Day were still up, most slightly tilted from the wind, their edges fraying. Ellie had a mic pinned to her coat and a list of houses to visit, per Walter's suggestion. First stop was Ms. Agnes. The elderly woman greeted them in a pale pink cardigan, her silver hair pulled back into a bun that shimmered like thread. She opened the screen door with a flourish. "Walter Beckett," she said, eyes twinkling. "You still making those ribs that beat the 4th of July fireworks?" Walter chuckled. "Only when the law allows, apparently." Agnes led them into her cozy sitting room, where a table was already set with teacups and a small apple pie cooling on a trivet. Framed photos lined the wall, family, holidays, one showing a younger Walter with a group of veterans, beer bottles in hand. "Back in '87, Agnes said, pulling a photo from a drawer, "we had 25 folks in your backyard. Eugene brought 3 racks of ribs. Karen's daddy even stopped by, he loved it." Ellie leaned forward. "Do you mind if I scan this?" Agnes waved her hand. "Sweetie, you're the only young one who listens. Take it." Outside, Eugene was sitting on his front steps, apron tied around his waist, the same faded blue with USS Thomas stitched over the chest. He was shelling pecans into a bowl, weathered hands working with quiet focus. "I remember building that fire pit with Walter," he said without prompting. "We set the bricks ourselves. Got the pit rings from my cousin in Norfolk. Back when Karen was still learning to drive." Walter sat beside him. "You ever hear of Regulation 4.2 before this year?" Eugene let out a sharp puff through his nose. "That ain't regulation. That's bureaucracy in pearls." They shared a long silence, punctuated only by the pop of pecan shells. As they continued their walk, they passed Jordan trimming hedges in front of his townhome. He looked up briefly, then back down at his shears. "Afternoon," Walter called. Jordan nodded. "Mr. Beckett." "Miss Beckett." His voice was polite but clipped. The bags under his eyes said he hadn't slept well. A folded HOA folder sat on a bench behind him, partially covered by gardening gloves. Walter noted it. "He's on the board, right?" Ellie whispered. Walter nodded. Bored, yes. Power? Not so sure. That afternoon, Walter stood before the locked HOA office, a converted shed behind the clubhouse. He knocked twice, hard enough to rattle the doorknob. No answer. From his coat pocket, he pulled the printed copy of the 1994 regulations, slipped it into a new envelope along with a handwritten note, community vote required. This isn't your backyard, Karen. He bent down and slid it under the door. Back home, the sky was shifting into lavender. Ellie stood in the driveway, arms crossed, camera at her side. Walter joined her, hands deep in his pockets. He looked toward the flag by the porch, newly straightened, and then out toward the quiet street. Let's cook something special this Veterans Day, he said. At exactly 11:11 a.m. on November 11th, Walter lit the coals, saluting the rising smoke like an old friend. The wind that morning came crisp off the Blue Ridge, just enough to rustle the porch chimes and carry the scent of charcoal down Beckett Way. A small crowd had already begun to gather, folding chairs scraping softly on damp lawn. Ellie stood near the garage, balancing a thermos of hot cider and a stack of napkins that kept catching the breeze. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen with wide eyes. Over 300 views already, she whispered to herself, and we haven't even started grilling. Walter didn't check the numbers. He stood in his backyard in a heavy flannel shirt, medals pinned above the pocket. His #1grandpa mug sat beside a pan of ribs just starting to hiss over the coals. A flag snapped lightly against the old oak. The pit glowed steady. Around him, neighbors filtered in with slow steps and side dishes balanced in plastic containers. Miss Agnes arrived first, supported by Eugene. She wore a poppy pin to her coat and clutched a bundt cake wrapped in foil. Eugene had on his navy apron again, this time layered over an American Legion windbreaker. Behind them came Mr. Chan, a retired Air Force mechanic, pushing his walker with a thermos tied to the side like a canteen. Music drifted in from the edge of the lawn, a quartet of retirees in mismatched jackets, brass instruments glinting in the cold sunlight. Their version of America the Beautiful was a bit uneven, but it carried heart. Walter stepped forward, voice steady. Let's begin. The crowd quieted. He removed his cap. Before the first bite, he said, "We remember." He read 10 names slowly, voice gruff but clear. Old friends. Former neighbors. Men who'd passed through wars and potlucks alike. As he read, Ellie turned the camera gently, panning over moist eyes and bowed heads. Silence followed. Then applause, gentle at first, then swelling. Eugene stepped forward, offering Walter a ladleful of his famous molasses sauce. Ellie passed around hot cider. Miss Agnes planted herself on a creaky lawn chair and offered slices of pie to anyone nearby, whether they knew her or not. Laughter rose. Someone played the harmonica, 3 soft notes of a tune half remembered. Children ran between chairs. For a moment, the backyard wasn't just a backyard, it was a living photo album, filled with breath and memory. On the sidewalk, a figure appeared. Karen stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. She didn't speak, didn't approach. Her phone flickered in her hand, and her lips pressed into a tight line. Walter saw her but said nothing. Instead, he raised his glass of cider. To the ones who stood beside us, and the ones who still do. Ellie nudged him gently. A man with a notepad had arrived, wearing a windbreaker embroidered with the local news station logo. He introduced himself with a quiet handshake. "I caught your granddaughter's video," he said. "Might run a segment on this for the 6 o'clock. Has a nice, hometown feel." Walter nodded. "As long as it's not politics. Just stories," the reporter replied. "That's what folks care about." A phone chimed near the potato salad table. Then another. A quiet ripple passed through the gathering as neighbors checked screens. A new email had arrived from the HOA board, subject line, "Notice, disruptive unscheduled gathering." Walter's brow twitched. He saw a few people shift uneasily, but no one moved to leave. Eugene muttered, "Let them write their little emails." Ellie smiled and zoomed in on the crowd again. "Still rolling," she whispered. Then, as the band moved into a slow version of "When the Saints Go Marching In," Jordan approached from the far edge of the yard. He had no clipboard, no camera, just a folded sheet of paper in his hand. He looked younger today, less guarded. His jacket bore a tiny pin of the HOA emblem, half hidden by his scarf. Walter greeted him with a nod. "Didn't think you'd show." "I had to see it myself," Jordan said softly, glancing toward Karen's silhouette across the street. He extended the folded paper. "You'll want to read this," he said, almost apologetically, quietly. The next morning, mailboxes bloomed with identical envelopes, bright white with the HOA logo, like little warnings from the crown. They arrived early, tucked with quiet authority among catalogs and credit card offers. Drizzle laced the sidewalks, turning fallen leaves into wet coins scattered along Beckett Way. Walter stood on his porch in his slippers, steam curling from his mug. He hadn't yet opened the envelope in his hand. His fingers traced the embossed seal as if it might vanish if he waited long enough. Across the street, Miss Agnes had no such patience. She squinted at her letter under a plastic bonnet, reading aloud from her porch rocker. "Violation of unauthorized assembly." She paused, eyebrows lifting. "How very British of them." Walter's lips twitched. Neighbors emerged in clusters, paper in hand, brows furrowed. At the corner house, Leo tapped his letter against the porch rail. "Complicity," he scoffed. "All I did was bring chili." By 10, the mood on Springdale had shifted. Conversations bloomed on every stoop. Even the usual lawn mowing rhythm paused. Karen was nowhere in sight, but her presence hung over the block like a gray cloud heavier than the sky. Ellie hovered near the edge of the lawn, phone out, filming short bursts of dialogue. Her Veterans Day video had quietly crossed 5,000 views overnight. Comments poured in, strangers from across the state thanking Walter, others asking for the sauce recipe. Ms. Dempsey's garage, usually a mausoleum of paint cans and garden tools, had become Springdale's version of a war room. A dozen folding chairs circled her card table. The coffee pot gurgled. Someone had brought cookies. Someone else had brought yarn. Who even voted on this? Mrs. Anika asked sharply, pen tapping furiously at a legal pad. Karen said it was board approved, muttered Leo, arms crossed. "Yeah, by her and her mirror." Ellie glanced up from her phone. "We've got over 80 comments on the neighborhood page. Some people didn't even know these rules changed." A murmur passed through the room. "She's hiding behind the bylaws," Ms. Dempsey said. "But she forgot we remember how this neighborhood used to be." A knitting needle clicked. Anika resumed looping thread calmly, as if building momentum stitch by stitch. Walter stood near the garage door, arms behind his back. He hadn't spoken much, just listened. But now he cleared his throat. "They're trying to scare people quiet," he said. "Letters in the dark, language just strong enough to confuse you, but vague enough to deny." Ellie tapped her phone screen. "Want to see vague?" Karen just posted on the HOA forum, "Recent activities were disruptive to community harmony and may reflect poorly on all involved." Leo scoffed. "What does that even mean?" Miss Agnes answered, "It means she's mad the chili was better than her 4th of July bean dip." Laughter broke the tension, and the group turned back to their notes. Later that evening, Ellie sat curled in the den, earbuds in, editing a new video. She layered soft harmonica strains under images of veterans hugging, cider being poured, and Walter's toast. The caption read, "A Veterans Day that didn't deserve threats." She hit upload. The notification pinged within minutes. Then another. Then a comment from a username, SpringdaleNeighbor_11. The gathering violated Article 8, Section 3. Not appropriate for children to witness civil unrest. Ellie narrowed her eyes. 2 minutes later, the same user replied to a second comment, but this time, they forgot to switch accounts. "Karen, you're still logged in under your alt," someone replied beneath. A beat passed. Then emojis flooded in. Laughing faces. Popcorn gifs. The digital equivalent of a gasp. Ellie turned the screen toward Walter with a grin. Caught red-handed. Walter didn't grin. He leaned back, watching the screen flicker in the dusk. Later that night, long after the streetlights flicked on and the drizzle turned into a fine mist, Walter found a note slipped under his door. In careful, almost hesitant handwriting. Meeting requested. Jordan. Not HOA sanctioned. The fluorescent lights of the old church basement flickered as 12 chairs circled like a jury with no judge. The air smelled faintly of old hymnals and burnt coffee. In the center of the circle, a metal folding table sagged slightly under the weight of a cardboard box labeled "Meeting Materials" and a platter of oatmeal cookies that looked older than some bylaws. Walter eased himself into one of the cold chairs. He gave the room a slow glance and exhaled. Last time I sat in a circle like this, he said quietly, it ended with a medal, or a busted ankle. A few chuckles broke the tension. Ellie sat beside him, backpack at her feet, flyers neatly stacked on her lap. Jordan entered last, a slim man with an overstuffed folder in one hand and a quiet resolve that clung to him like starch. 3 others completed the circle, Mrs. Long, with her sharp eyes and wool shawl, Ted, who adjusted his glasses more than he spoke, and Raj, silent so far, but observant. Karen Templeton's seat remained conspicuously empty. Jordan cleared his throat. Thanks for coming. This isn't official. Not by the books, anyway. But after last week's letters, and the fallout from the video, I think it's time we all saw what's been going on. He opened the folder and began distributing papers, printouts, emails, line items with timestamps. Ellie leaned in, her eyes scanning rapidly. This, Jordan pointed to a chart, is the landscaping budget for the past 12 months. Look at the vendor name, Templeton Grounds and Turf. That's Karen's brother's firm. Ted furrowed his brow. I don't remember voting for this contract. You didn't, Ellie replied, already flipping to another sheet. I checked the archived minutes. There's no mention of a formal vote, just a vague landscaping updates approved during spring session. Which, by the way, had no community invitation. Mrs. Long grunted. She claimed it was an emergency fund adjustment. $14,000 isn't an emergency, Walter said. It's a down payment. Jordan nodded. I've got invoices signed by Karen, not the treasurer. Checks written without co-signers. We're talking a pattern. Ted swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe she'd go this far. Karen's had control for too long, Mrs. Long said. At first, she just pushed for neat hedges and holiday decor. Then it was flag regulations. Now this. Jordan looked around the room. We can call for a community vote. It's in the charter. 60% quorum, anonymous ballots, results binding. If we act fast, we can circulate the notice by Friday. And if she finds out? Raj asked, finally speaking. She's not the backing down type. She won't go quietly, Mrs. Long agreed. But she can't fight numbers. Ellie quietly passed out the flyers from her backpack, simple, black and white sheets titled, Know Your HOA Rights. Walter took one and turned it over in his hands. Jordan stood up, the creak of his chair echoing. We're going to need signatures. Volunteers. We need every house. Every voice. There was a silence, the kind that hangs not from hesitation, but agreement settling in the bones. Walter looked up, his face calm, eyes steady. Then we start walking, door to door. The cold December air didn't stop Walter, he'd walked through worse in Annam and wouldn't stop now for a clipboard. His boots pressed into the frostbitten sidewalk with a purpose, the rhythm steady. Ellie trailed beside him, scarf fluttering as she fished out another peppermint-striped candy cane to tape onto the next petition form. 42 signatures, she murmured, checking her phone. Need at least 60 before Friday. Walter gave a grunt that could have meant acknowledgement or wind resistance. They approached the Brensons' porch, where a pair of mechanical reindeer bobbed rhythmically beside a life-sized Santa inflatable, its beard flapping in the breeze. Mr. Brenson opened the door wearing a cardigan and socks and sandals. "Walter. You're out early." "Just early enough," Walter said. "Mind signing a little something for the neighborhood soul?" Mrs. Brenson joined, wiping flour from her hands. "If it gets that woman off her self-declared throne, hand me the pen." Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an arthritis-friendly grip pen, a detail Ellie had insisted on after their first day canvassing. "No excuses," he said dryly, and both Brensons chuckled. "One more signature." At Miss Park's house, they found her setting out a modest nativity set. She looked up, hesitated, then offered a sad smile. "I voted for her, you know. I thought she cared about order." Walter didn't say anything. "But rules shouldn't silence life," Miss Park added, and with a slight bow, she signed the petition. "Would you be okay sharing that on video?" Ellie asked gently. "Just your words, not the vote part." Miss Park nodded slowly. "If it helps." Further down, at Leo and Anita's, the welcome was warmer. Leo gave Walter a firm handshake, Anita gave Ellie a thermos of hot cider. "We've had enough of walking on eggshells," Anita said, scribbling her name. "You're doing what we should have done years ago." They skipped one house entirely, its lawn decorated only with a cold, rigid sign, "No trespassing. HOA compliant residents only." A fake security camera blinked from the porch eaves. Walter paused. "Karen's crew." "Yup," Ellie said. "She's doubled her Facebook posts since Monday." Back at the sidewalk, mailman Gary rolled up on his route. "Heard you two are getting popular," he joked. "Karen dropped another letter in folks' boxes this morning." "What now?" Walter asked. Gary pulled a copy from his pouch, handed it over discreetly. "She's accusing you of intimidation tactics. Claims you're coercing signatures." Walter's brow nodded. "Didn't raise my voice once." "I know that," Gary said. "Most folks do too. But she's rattled. Rumor is, she's planning an emergency vote, some backdoor clause she found in a dusty binder." Ellie's fingers flew over her phone. "The HOA forum's on fire. She's posting under the Springdale Harmony thread. A lot of capital letters." "Good thing we've got facts," Walter said, folding the letter and tucking it under his arm. Ellie stopped in her tracks. Miss Park's interview just hit 1,200 views. "Real voices cut through noise," Walter replied. That night, Ellie edited a new video, 5 minutes of quiet resolve and testimony. She kept Miss Park's gentle words front and center, fading into scenes of hot cider and shaking hands, candy canes passed like torchlights. Her phone buzzed shortly after she hit upload. A message from Jordan. "Karen just scheduled an emergency board vote for Sunday 9 a.m., with herself as the sole chair." At 8:59 a.m., folding chairs filled with folks in flannel, thermals, and quiet defiance. The low hum of whispered greetings mixed with the occasional rattle of coffee in styrofoam cups. Outside, the air was brittle with winter's edge, but inside the Springdale Grove Community Center, warmth built, not from the heater, but from shared purpose. Walter sat near the front, hat in hand, eyes on the modest podium where Jordan adjusted the microphone. Ellie positioned herself in the corner, tripod steady, camera already recording. She caught a glimpse of Mr. Chan adjusting his tie, Ms. Agnes passing a thermos down the row, and Eugene rubbing the embroidered patch on his jacket. Karen entered at 9:01. She walked with her chin high, clipboard in one hand, a worn manila folder in the other. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, sharp and deliberate. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Just placed her items on the board table and scanned the crowd. Jordan cleared his throat. "We're convening today per Section 3.5b of the Springdale Grove Charter, regarding community-initiated review of HOA leadership." Karen raised a hand before he could continue. "As current president," she said crisply, "I must object. This gathering lacks legal basis. As per the amended clause I submitted last March, only sanctioned board meetings. Raj interrupted gently. That clause was never ratified. The residents have submitted more than the required signatures. The vote stands. Karen blinked. For a breath, her mouth opened and closed, like a fish yanked from water. Then she smiled tightly. So this is how it ends. Trial by mob. It's a vote, Mrs. Long said evenly. Not a hanging. Ellie's lens tightened. The camera's red light blinked, silent and steady. Walter rose. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't pace. Just stood, hat still in his hands. I'm not a man of speeches, he began. But I do know this. When I came home from the war, all I wanted was a quiet street. A porch to sit on. The smell of ribs on Sunday. And neighbors who knew your name, not just your mailbox number. A hush spread. He looked down for a moment. We served our country. We can serve our neighborhood. A beat passed. Then Jordan nodded. All those in favor of removing Karen Templeton from the HOA presidency, please raise your hand. Hands lifted. Slowly at first, then like ripples. One by one. Nearly every hand in the room. Walter's was among them. Karen stared. This is absurd, she whispered. I gave this place structure. No one answered. She gathered her clipboard, turned to the door. There, hand on the handle, she stopped. It was easier, she murmured, when no one paid attention. Then she stepped out into the cold. The silence held a second longer, then someone clapped. A neighbor. Then another. Soon, the room pulsed with gentle applause, not raucous, but real. Walter sat again, expression unreadable, until Ellie approached. She held up her camera. They're asking for a follow-up, she said. A documentary maybe. Walter looked at the blinking red light. Let's call it Smoke and Justice, he said. Later, the folding chairs were stacked two at a time. A boy helped Ellie untangle cords. Miss Agnes pressed a tin of cookies into Walter's hands, cinnamon raisin, like your wife used to make. A few neighbors gathered by the bulletin board, already talking about decorating the town sign for Christmas. Outside, the wind stirred softly. Somewhere, a wind chime sang in the distance. The smoke had long cleared, but the memory of that morning, folding chairs, quiet resolve, and neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, lingered like the scent of hickory in the breeze. What began as one man defending a backyard tradition became a neighborhood reclaiming its voice. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble. Perhaps it's never too late to join hands with neighbors, to speak up for what's fair. After all, even the smallest flame can light a porch, and warm a town.